This is Deborah Atkinson. Welcome to the Flipping 50 Show, where I address your top questions and the things you struggle with most so you can have more energy and less decision fatigue about what to eat and how to move, and you can change your thoughts so you can flip 50 and have the life and the energy that you deserve in this second half. In today's episode, I'm revisiting osteoporosis, and it's a topic that we have addressed in the past. However, I've recently given several Facebook Live presentations on our Friday at noon, so check in there occasionally if you're not already. And I've gotten lots more questions, and as I relay the information that may be very familiar to me, what I'm realizing is that there's so much information out there, the same old story, that it's confusion because there's so much conflicting information, and you may be hearing one piece of information from one of your very credible sources, in fact from your doctor, that isn't quite up to the science of exercise and results that come back for better bone scans if you're having a pre-post test. So I want to address some of the most common questions, some of the most common sources of conflict, if you will. So first of all, I'm going to refer to a 2017 study, so very new, very fresh, and it reiterates or emphasizes the same thing that I've been telling people for over 2 decades, based on also the science of what exercise correlates most with improvements in bone density. And then beyond that, we're going to look at, really talk about what is the viability, the real possibility, in other words, that you can increase your bone density depending on where you are. If you are a young woman, adult, pre-menopause, there's, one status for that versus someone who's in peri or menopause, and then someone who's in post-menopause. There's different possibilities for you in terms of what you're doing to either prevent bone density losses or prevent bone density and in fact gain bone density. So we're going to look at what can you actually do during which phase, and based on that ability to do those particular things, what exercise is both most safe, still plays that game so that we're not putting you at risk of injury, and gets you the most results in the least amount of time, which we're all still very interested in. So I want to just relay the information that's come from this most recent 2017 piece of research, and really comes from an article or abstract published in PubMed. So we know that's high quality, that's peer-reviewed journals that have gone through the test. So this is not just a simply relaying articles and what we think. This is based on research. And this 2017 was actually a review of a lot of studies and then looking at what has been done, what is possible. And the outcome of that is that high intensity resistive strength training proved that it provided the maximum benefit, bone muscle density or bone mineral density and muscle mass with a reduction of fractures. So all the things that you're really wanting. We want, yes, the bone mineral density to increase. And that means it's like you're putting more money in the bank, if you will, because sooner or later we often start withdrawing, right? When we do that from a bank account, we do the same thing with our bone density. And that age is about 30 when we peak in bone density. And we start withdrawing unless we're doing something to really slow it down purposefully. There are several things we can do, like exercise, specific types of exercise that we'll get into in a little bit, and nutrition. So we know calcium and the things that support calcium absorption, vitamin D, magnesium, are wise things to be doing. So the sources we get them from may change or vary based on our nutritional sensitivities or nutritional needs, but that hasn't gone away. We do still need them. Posture and balance exercises only improved mobility. So when, for instance, you were given, say, postural exercises with smaller weights to support your upper back from rounding, keeping you upright, shoulders open, down, and maybe exercises like yoga or Pilates, those things were good for improving mobility, which might spare you from a fall, but they do not lend themselves to bone density increases. And largely for those people who, unless you are very frail, won't also contribute to muscle mass. And muscle mass itself can pull on the bone to some small extent, and that is a part of increasing bone mineral density. High force exercise does not increase fractures and is associated with bone mineral density increases. So what we're talking about here is high force exercise, and I had to go in and dig into the study and really look at what are they calling high force exercise, because you could, and I could interpret it in 2 different ways, and 10 people reading it could interpret it in 10 different ways. So high force might sound like this is high impact. Plyometrics is what we call jumping, basically leaving the ground, but we could do plyometric push-ups as well, really pushing up with power, coming back down, even leaving the floor in some cases. But typically it's jumping, leaping, leaving the ground. That would be plyometric and definitely high force. So often the things that we would associate with quote-unquote boot camp kinds of activities. But actually high force exercise can also mean simply adding power, meaning speed and strength components put together. And that high force exercise can be done in a resistance training or strength training type of activity. And that's really what this study was looking at. High force exercise, meaning heavier loads and with a speed factor going a little bit faster. That was not a risk for increase of fractures and was associated with bone mineral density. So we're looking at high intensity resistive strength training. Posture and balance exercises only improve mobility. Now that might be helpful in helping you avoid falls and improve your balance, because you'll be less likely to compensate somehow otherwise in your body. And then third, high force exercise to include powerful kinds of strength training and also some of those types of reaction activities that might involve jumping or hopping if you are able. So low intensity programs, still referring to the same study by the way, low intensity programs provided less pronounced benefits initially and led to increased risk of falls. So low intensity programs, back to resistance training, would be lower, lighter kinds of weights. So lifting much lighter weight and potentially doing fewer repetitions as well, not reaching fatigue. But the interesting second note about that is 10-year follow-ups for programs like that with lighter weights, not necessarily going to fatigue, did show evidence of reduced fractures. So there may be some benefit in terms of muscle strength that carried over into better balance and reducing risk of falls, reducing fear of falling plays into it big time. And after 3 months of strength training, participants generally who felt there was less risk of falling, they were at less risk and reduced their fear, did fall less. So there's a little piece of what we think is true is true. If we feel like we are vulnerable to falls, we probably are more likely to fall. And so the science backs that up. Patients with prior hip fracture or vertebral fracture, your spine, or identified as high risk due to, say, repeated falls, are all considered high risk of fracture for the future. So if you have a prior hip fracture, my mother, for instance, or a vertebral fracture, you've already fractured your spine, and you may not know that, which is a risk. Or you're identified as high risk due to having had repeated falls. If you've fallen before, we think you're more likely to fall again. You're considered high risk. So let's talk a little bit about 4 components that actually are going to be a part of a good kind of anti-osteoporosis training program, especially if you're a female, because we have smaller bones overall. Body size tends to be smaller than males, so we don't have the same weight, we don't have the same muscle mass, and our bones tend to be a little bit smaller in nature. So that's one reason we're more likely to develop osteoporosis. Another is estrogen is for us a protective hormone, but when we go through perimenopause and menopause and we lose some of that, we begin to be more likely to lose bone mass at an accelerated rate, certainly during perimenopause and menopause. And then out the other side, we slow again the loss and become a little bit more equal to men. But as we reach ages 75 and 80, that speeds up and men actually become pretty much our peer equal. We're losing bone mass at about the same rate, and men may be equally as likely to develop osteoporosis after that point. So here's the 4 things that need to be present. If you're really consciously thinking, one of my primary goals is to keep my bones strong to avoid osteoporosis, you want to look at these. You want to make sure you have strength training. And when I'm talking strength training, my preference for someone is using weights. So looking at machine weights and some activity with free weight exercises as well. Now, use of cable machines is also looked at as weight machine use. So any type of machine weight, some dumbbells, and then cable use. And the reason I'm putting them specifically in that order is when we really are targeting bone density, we want to go heavy, and as heavy as you safely can. And that varies for all of us based on, what got us here. If we've lived really well, we may have injuries to our shoulders, to our neck, to our hips, to knees that won't allow us to go heavy without putting ourselves at risk for another reason. So it's always a weight of what's the advantage versus the disadvantage, and you want to come up long on the advantages. If there are disadvantages, we want to leave that activity out in choice or in choosing better so that we can more optimally still accomplish the goal with the least amount of risk and trying to sweeten the pot. So it's always safer. Do no harm, do no injury to yourself, just like a doctor should do no harm to his patients first. So strength training is very important. And I say that specifically, weights, dumbbells, as opposed to there are a lot of other ways like bands or tubing or tools like the suspension tools now you might know as TRX if you're familiar with them. Pilates reformers or the total gym, that type of pulling and lifting. But I think what's really important is that you are lifting a weight and able to reach fatigue. And I know a lot of people will tell me, well, I can reach fatigue doing a push-up. I can't do 10 of those. But the challenge is, can you go through full range of motion with good form to come, somewhere between 5 and 10 to reach fatigue? And then what else can you do with body weight in a pulling form so that you will reach fatigue and for your lower body? So it's really necessary in some cases. If I had the most safe environment for, say, an aging woman, and let's take my mom, I would hope she could access the small community gym using equipment for safety, so she can safely be supported through the back, through the spine, while she's lifting a progressively heavier and heavier weight. That would be the smartest thing to do. So hopefully that lends itself to a little bit more weighty advice. So anything I would have my mother do has to be something that, I'm recommending that for you as well. So that number one is strength training. Number two is posture training, because your center of gravity, when you stood up tall, was directly over your feet. That's where you have the best balance. You're the least likely to fall. What happens with our posture as we age is, if you just close your eyes and picture an aging adult, maybe it's not your parent, maybe it's a grandparent or someone further back than that, we tend to roll forward through the upper back, and our center of gravity then comes out further than right between our feet, and maybe over our toes, or it might be even further out there if you really have poor posture. That becomes an issue. And so we want good postural training so we have better balance, a better sense of where we are, and our perception is good. And there's more to be said about that. Now, I'm bringing an expert on in the future, so tune into that, about posture using technology so much, whether it's your desktop, maybe your computer is not at the right spot. If you're looking down at a laptop as I am right now, it's not ideal right here. Or if you're texting frequently, looking down at your phone, text neck is a thing, but it is not just the posture that's the problem. It's actually what happens in your brain when you're looking down. And it can, in some cases, cause dementia. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. The third piece, if we've got strength training, then we've got posture-specific training, is balance training. Literally, training for strength. We used to theorize that in itself would help you with balance. There is not a lot of strong study or research that proved that to be true. The carryover is not quite there. So it may make it easier for you to practice balance exercises that will increase your balance, but strength training alone does not necessarily do that. And when you think about what I've just suggested you do with machine weights, that's a very stable environment. So you won't necessarily gain balance simply from doing that kind of activity. So looking at the heavy enough weights, so there's push on the bone and they push back and respond with more bone density, is one way to think of need. Now using free weights, dumbbells for instance, you could do a split stance and a lunge type of activity, and you might think that's immediately better because of what I just said. However, you would have to reduce the weight that you were able to lift so you wouldn't have that push back. We want to cover all our bases. So truly doing strength training, truly doing postural training, and truly doing balance training will probably isolate and help most of all. And that means from as simple as standing one-legged in your kitchen with your hands on the counter, just in case, and or standing one-legged with your eyes closed, again, for balance, just in case, and or doing yoga poses, taking it to a little bit more advanced stage. All of those things would be good ways to practice balance training. Reaction skills is another one that would be falling under balance training. So if I were standing in a stagger stance, imagine standing on a balance beam, one leg in front of the other, that's stagger stance. And I would throw a ball to you, catch a ball coming from you, and then we could be nice to each other and throw it directly at our chest or belly, but we'd actually have more balance training if we threw that ball slightly off target to our left or to our right and up a little higher, down a little bit lower, unpredictably, so that we had to adjust without picking up our feet. That would be a good test. So the last one is aerobic training, because there is correlation with people who have better aerobic training actually having fewer falls. So the better your fitness level, the higher your fitness level, beyond a certain point, it doesn't count more. But going from being a beginner or being a couch potato, let's say, to being moderately active and fit, your risk of falling goes down tremendously. So those are the 4 pieces. Strength training. You need to be lifting weights. You need to be doing some specific postural training, working with smaller muscles in your upper back, potentially opening up through your hips, lifting up, getting used to what neutral spine is. Balance training, including some of that reaction skills and testing while you're doing balance, and then aerobic training. All 4 of them. And when you look back at those, postural training may be a little bit more specific. Balance training may not always be there, but that is a good rounded fitness program. By age 70, people lose about 50 to 55% of maximum muscle mass, which allows for easy falls. So resistance training is important because it does directly benefit bone density, but it also indirectly benefits bone density by directly affecting the muscle mass. The stronger you are, the least likely you are to fall. Best bone mineral density for the neck of the femur is your thigh bone, by the way, is non-weight bearing high force exercise. And let me tell you what that is. So the best way to build your bone mineral density for your hip joint is what we're talking, really that ball and socket joint, is non-weight bearing exercise. It's not walking, it's not even jump roping. It's actually using something like a squat or a leg press machine so that you can lift heavily and directly correspond to that joint. The expected outcomes. What can you expect if you're doing it? So here we go. Post-menopause, increasing your bone density is really not typical. It's not a realistic goal. Losses are going to occur, and exercise does this. It serves to prevent or slow those losses and to increase your strength, your balance, your posture, all of which decrease your risk of falls and the fractures that come after them. So a very effective osteoporosis prevention or bone density program for you if you are post-menopause would be that you're not losing bone mineral density as rapidly as if you weren't. So average losses are 1 to 3% a year. So if you're not losing anything or you're losing just 1% and you say have high risk because maybe you're fair-skinned, blue-eyed, Scandinavian looks, or you've had more than 1 to 2 drinks or alcoholic drinks a day, or you've been a great caffeine consumptor, all right, for a long period of time. Maybe there's history, so genetics do play a part, but a small one. In the entire list, that's one small piece. Your environment and your habits have a whole lot more to do with it. Hip strength and bone density increase around the hip may lower overall falls and risk of fracture from a fall. So that would definitely be one thing to focus on. Your lower leg strength, your hip strength in particular. As far as nutrition goes, calcium, vitamin D, and exercise in combination. So that nutritional side of things plus the exercise in combination or collectively work better than any one approach in isolation. So if you just exercise but you're not paying attention to your nutrition, or you just do the calcium and the vitamin D and you're not exercising, you're potentially going to have some benefit, but you're not going to have the best. So the best of both worlds is to cover the exercise and cover the nutrition. Starting habits with nutrition that help, stopping habits that detract. So looking at osteopenia and osteoporosis, I just want to define these 2 terms for you. what we define as healthy bone, kind of the standard that we want everybody, or that we hold the candle to measure, is like a healthy young adult. And that's kind of, okay, here's cream of the crops where we'd like to be. Deviating from that at all, at 2.5 standard deviations from that ideal, that's where you would be diagnosed as having osteoporosis. Now, there is a thing, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, there's a thing called osteopenia, which 10 to 15 years ago, many people were a little disgruntled at the realization that osteopenia really wasn't, it's not a disease. In fact, it's just a kind of a marker. It's a precursor between good, healthy bone and that which is osteoporosis. But no matter what, I like the idea of osteopenia. You're not to that standard deviation yet. There may be time for you to do something proactively if you know you're not going in the right direction. And yet, a lot of people felt that this was pharmaceutical company derived term in order to scare people into using their pharmaceuticals to improve or increase their bone density. So tongue-in-cheek, whatever you think of it and whatever your history of knowledge is about that, osteopenia is not quite down the road, so far gone that you have osteoporosis and significantly low bone density, but you're not going in the right direction. So it's a huge wake-up call. You need to know that this is not a good place to be in. If someone tells me, I only have osteopenia, it doesn't matter. I would treat it as if you have osteoporosis, and I would be doing everything under your power to improve both your bone density and your muscle strength. Begin looking at balance and finding ways that you can incorporate that into every day. So important that you're doing it. 3 osteozones that we in particular look at. We've talked about the hip. The spine is another one, and the wrists. Super small area where your bones are small. But when you think about falling, most of us would naturally just spontaneously put our hand out to stop or prevent a fall, risking a fracture, potentially to our wrist as opposed to our hip, and a fracture is a fracture. So either one, in terms of finding out you have osteoporosis, a lot of times that's the reason why. You have fallen, you've spared yourself a hard fall, but maybe in doing so fractured your wrist, so that x-ray shows that then you do have low bone mineral density. So definitely it's time, once you're healed, to get back to a protocol with looking at what works best. And I'm going to leave you there with that as an evaluation and tease a little bit. So this is a shameful plug for a new mini program that will actually evaluate what is your current risk, what are you doing now, what have you tried, and then take you into, depending on where you are, if you're premenopause, if you are perimenopause and in menopause, just full blown, you're right there, you're hot, by the way, or if you're post-menopause and you still want to do whatever you can to improve your health and decrease your losses, what it is the program actually looks like in terms of exercise and what you want to stay aware of in terms of nutrition. If you're interested in a program, what I'd love for you to do is either respond to the comment section underneath this podcast at flipping50.com/podcast for August the 20th. I'm losing track of my dates. In terms of eclipse, I'm just all out of sorts today. But August 22nd, I believe it will be. When you're looking at that date and the podcast, look for the comments on flipping50.com if you happen to be listening from iTunes, and let me know, yes, I'm interested. And I will keep you posted and know where to let everybody aware that the mini course is ready. And for some of you lucky people in the After 50 Fitness Formula for Women online do-it-yourself course, this is going to be a new part of the upgrade and just kind of the facelift makeover for fall of 2017, because it is our 3-year anniversary over Labor Day weekend. So that'll be a gift to those of you who are in it this year. For those of you who are contemplating or thinking about getting in, that would be one way to do it. So go and take advantage of that at the same rate. We will slightly increase our rate in 2017 after we've celebrated the anniversary, but let me know that. So I'd love to know also, what are your biggest questions? We're building this course for you, and it absolutely have a long list of questions from people who've submitted to this point, but we want to keep listening. And so we're out here, we're doing it for you, so let us know what they are. If you have a question, the place to submit that is below that show link, flipping50.com/podcast, and look for the August 22nd post. And join us on the Facebook fan page at Flipping 50 TV as well. You can seek out that live broadcast I did about osteoporosis by looking in the videos column, and it should be there. Just scroll down slightly and you'll see it talking about bone density. And then share this podcast with a friend, someone else who might be concerned about osteoporosis or exercising but not quite sure if they're doing everything that they need to do to age actively and amazingly. Flipping 50. So what are you waiting for? Start Flipping 50 today.